The history of the world changed with a single, radiating pulse of light in Xinjiang City, China. From the moment that glowing baby took its first breath, humanity was violently shoved onto a new evolutionary path. The age of the mundane died, and the era of quirks, superhuman abilities woven into the very DNA of mankind, was born. Over generations, society adapted to this new normal. What was once the domain of comic books and mythology became the morning traffic report. Pyrokinesis, telepathy, localized gravity manipulation, gigantification, they all became biological functions, as ordinary as breathing or sweating. Quirks were physical. They had limits. They drew upon stamina, lipids, muscle fibers, and the nervous system. But what manifested in Izuku Midoriya was not a quirk. It was not a genetic mutation passed down from his fire-breathing father or his object-attracting mother. It did not rely on his blood sugar, his physical stamina, or the caloric intake of his meals. It was something older. Something infinitely vaster. It was the energy that existed before the first star ignited in the primordial dark, the silent hum that connected the spaces between atoms, the lifeblood of the cosmos itself. It was the Force. And in a universe where the Force had never before found a vessel, it poured itself entirely into the pure, unblemished soul of a 4-year-old boy in Musudafu, Japan. This is the story of how that boy learned to carry the weight of the universe. Springtime in Musudafu was usually a vibrant affair. The cherry blossoms drifted through the warm afternoon air, settling on the pavements like pink snow. The local woods, a small preserve of nature amidst the urban sprawl, vibrated with the sound of cicadas and the rushing waters of a swollen creek. For a young Izuku Midoriya, the woods were an empire of imagination. He was 4 years old, a tiny, freckled boy with a wild mop of green hair and eyes that held an innocent, boundless admiration for the world. Chief among the subjects of his admiration was his childhood friend, Katsuki Bakugo. Katsuki, known affectionately, and perhaps subserviently, as Kaken, was everything Izuku believed a hero should be. He was loud, confident, fearless, and recently, he had awakened a quirk that seemed tailor-made for a champion. Katsuki could secrete nitroglycerin like sweat from his palms and ignite it at will. Even at 4, the pops and sparks that danced across Katsuki's hands were mesmerizing. Izuku, who had yet to show any signs of a quirk, followed Katsuki like a faithful shadow, soaking in the blonde boy's radiant confidence. "Come on, Deku! Keep up!" Katsuki barked, marching through the underbrush with a stick clutched in his hand like a broadsword. Behind him, 2 other neighborhood boys trailed along, their faces painted with the same awe that Izuku held. "I'm coming, Kaken!" Izuku chirped, his short legs pumping as he scrambled over exposed tree roots. The group arrived at their favorite challenge, a moss-covered log that spanned a rushing, rocky creek. The drop wasn't lethal, but to a 4-year-old, it was a canyon. The water below churned angrily against jagged gray stones, swollen by recent spring rains. Katsuki didn't hesitate. He hopped onto the log, his chest puffed out, balancing with the innate arrogance of a child who believed the world was shaped for his convenience. He didn't just walk across, he strutted. He looked back over his shoulder, a fiery spark popping playfully from his right palm. "See? It's easy when you're strong," Katsuki boasted, a wide, feral grin spreading across his face. "Only extras get scared." Izuku stood at the edge of the bank, his small hands clutching the straps of his bright yellow overalls. "Wow, you're amazing, Kaken." But pride, as the ancient proverbs warned, often precedes a fall. As Katsuki turned back to face the opposite bank, the heel of his red sneaker found a patch of slick, rain-soaked moss. There was no time for his reflexes to save him. His foot shot out from beneath him. The confident grin vanished from Katsuki's face, replaced by a sudden, jarring mask of absolute terror. His arms flailed wildly, the stick tumbling from his grasp. The world seemed to slow to an agonizing crawl. "Kaken!" Izuku screamed, his voice tearing through the serene forest air. Izuku didn't think. He didn't consider his lack of a quirk, his physical weakness, or the danger. He simply reacted. He lunged forward, throwing his small hands out toward his falling friend as if his desperately outstretched fingers could somehow bridge the 10 feet of empty air between them. "I have to catch him. I have to save him." In that microscopic fraction of a second, something inside Izuku Midoriya shattered. Or rather, something was unlocked. It did not feel like a muscle flexing. It did not feel like a rush of adrenaline. It felt as if a dam holding back an ocean of starlight had suddenly ruptured within his chest. Whoosh! The sound was non-existent, yet deafening. It was a pressure drop in the atmosphere, a sudden, echoing resonance that vibrated in the marrow of Izuku's bones. Suddenly, Izuku wasn't just standing on the muddy bank. He was the bank. He felt the cold, rushing water of the creek. He felt the deep, ancient roots of the oak trees anchoring into the soil. He felt the panicked, racing heartbeats of the two other boys beside him. He felt the fluttering wings of a sparrow a mile away. He felt the rotation of the planet, and he felt Katsuki. Katsuki was suspended in midair, a mere 3 feet above the jagged rocks. The blond boy's eyes were squeezed shut, his face braced for an impact that would surely break bones. But the impact never came. Katsuki opened his eyes slowly. The rushing water was directly beneath his nose, the spray misting his cheeks. But he wasn't falling. He was hovering. On the bank, Izuku stood frozen. His right hand was outstretched, palm open, his small fingers trembling violently. A profound, terrifyingly calm energy radiated from the green-haired boy. The air around Izuku seemed to warp and shimmer, like heat rising off asphalt on a summer day. The two extra boys gasped, stumbling backward into the dirt. Izuku didn't notice them. His emerald eyes were wide, glowing with an ethereal, luminous light that banished the forest shadows. He wasn't lifting Katsuki with invisible hands. He was commanding the very fabric of space around Katsuki to hold him aloft. With a small, instinctual flick of his wrist, Izuku pulled his hand upward. Katsuki gasped as he was hoisted smoothly into the air, ascending as if carried by a gentle, invisible elevator. He floated back up to the level of the log, then drifted horizontally until he was deposited, softly and safely, onto the grassy bank beside Izuku. The moment Katsuki's feet touched solid ground, the connection severed. The ethereal glow in Izuku's eyes vanished. The staggering weight of the universe collapsed back onto the 4-year-old's mind all at once. The sensory overload was apocalyptic. The sound of the creek wasn't just loud, it was a roaring avalanche. The smell of the damp earth was suffocating. The residual panic in Katsuki's mind echoed in Izuku's own head like a ringing bell. Izuku's eyes rolled back, and he collapsed into the mud, unconscious before he even hit the ground. Katsuki sat in the dirt, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He stared at his own hands, then at the rocks below, and finally at the unconscious body of the boy he had always considered a weak, pathetic follower. For the first time in his life, Katsuki Bakugo felt a shadow loom over him. It was a shadow cast not by a villain, but by an unimaginable, incomprehensible power. The sterile white walls of Dr. Tsubasa's clinic were a familiar sight to the worried mothers of Mizutsufu. Inko Midoriya sat nervously in the hard plastic chair, wringing her hands in her lap. Her son Izuku sat on the examination table, swinging his short legs. He looked perfectly healthy, completely unharmed by the day's events. In fact, since waking up, he had been eerily calm. Too calm for a 4-year-old. The door swung open, and Dr. Tsubasa entered, clutching a clipboard and looking deeply perplexed. He pushed his thick, round glasses up the bridge of his nose, staring at the X-ray films illuminated on the wall monitor. "Well, Mrs. Midoriya," the doctor began, his voice dragging with confusion. "I have some highly contradictory news." Inko leaned forward, her heart skipping a beat. "Is he all right? Did his quirk manifest?" "Katsuki's mother called me," she was hysterical. "She said Izuku made her son float without touching him." "Physically, Izuku is in perfect health," Dr. Tsubasa said, tapping his pen against the clipboard. He pointed a stubby finger at the X-ray of Izuku's foot. "But genetically, this makes absolutely no sense. Look here. The pinky toe. Izuku possesses the extra joint. As you know, this is the universal marker for the quirkless. The evolutionary vestige hasn't streamlined in his biology." Inko's face fell, a wave of profound sorrow washing over her. "Quirkless? But Natsuki swore." "I know what she swore," Dr. Tsubasa interrupted, turning to look at the green-haired boy. "And I've seen the security footage from the street camera near the woods. Izuku did, indeed, manipulate gravity and mass to pull the Bakugo boy to safety. I've run brainwave scans, empathic resonance tests, and telekinetic stress monitors. The doctor sighed, taking off his glasses and rubbing his temples. By all modern biological standards, your son is entirely quirkless. He does not have a quirk factor in his blood. He does not have the specialized neural pathways required to command a superhuman ability. If Eraserhead, the pro-hero who can nullify quirks, were to look at Izuku, nothing would happen. Because biologically, there is nothing to erase. I don't understand, Inko whispered, tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. If he doesn't have a quirk, how did he do it? Dr. Tsubasa looked at Izuku. The boy wasn't looking at the doctor or his mother. He was staring intently at a potted fern sitting on the windowsill. Izuku, the doctor said gently. Can you tell me how you moved your friend? Izuku turned his head. His large green eyes seemed older somehow, carrying a depth that unsettled the seasoned physician. I didn't move him, Izuku said, his voice quiet but remarkably steady. I asked the space around him to hold him. The doctor frowned. You asked it? Like telekinesis? You used your mind to lift him? Izuku shook his head slowly. No. Telekinesis is pushing. Mom does that when she pulls her keys to her hand. She pulls. I didn't pull Kaken. I just felt the strings. The strings? Inko asked, reaching out to stroke her son's hair. Izuku looked up at his mother, his expression earnest. Everything is singing, Mom. The plants, the air, the bugs in the walls. Even you. You have a warm, bright song. The doctor's song is gray and confused. The whole world is breathing, and when I close my eyes I can hear it. I just held onto the breath and moved Kaken. Silence filled the examination room. Dr. Tsubasa stared at the child, a shiver running down his spine. This wasn't the rambling of an imaginative child. The brainwave scans during the boy's description showed intense, localized activity in regions of the brain that humanity hadn't even categorized yet. Mrs. Midoriya, Dr. Tsubasa said finally, his voice hushed. I am going to register his quirk officially as a rare, ultra-powerful mutant strain of telekinesis. It will keep the government and the Hero Public Safety Commission from poking too closely. But between you and me, whatever your son is tapping into, it defies biology. It defies physics. Inko pulled Izuku into a fierce hug, tears spilling over her cheeks. It doesn't matter what it is, she sobbed. He's my baby. He's safe. Izuku rested his chin on his mother's shoulder. He didn't cry. Instead, he stared at the desk across the room. On it sat a heavy, lead paperweight. Without blinking, without a shift in his breathing or a twitch of his muscles, Izuku willed it to rise. The paperweight smoothly lifted 2 feet into the air, spun silently on its axis, and settled back down without making a single sound. Izuku closed his eyes, leaning into his mother's embrace. The universe is so loud, he thought. I need to learn how to make it quiet. By the time Izuku and Katsuki reached their second year of elementary school, the dynamic between them had permanently, irreparably fractured. In a normal world, Katsuki Bakugo would have been the undisputed king of the playground. His explosion quirk was powerful, flashy, and naturally geared toward combat. He was athletic, aggressively intelligent, and possessed a sheer force of will that cowed other children into submission. But Izuku Midoriya was an anomaly that Katsuki could not compute. Izuku did not flaunt his power. He rarely used it in public, preferring to sit under the shade of an oak tree during recess, reading books or simply staring up at the clouds with a tranquil, distant expression. Yet, every child in the school knew. They remembered the rumors of the woods. They saw the way objects would subtly shift out of Izuku's way when he walked through a crowded hallway. Katsuki hated it. He hated the calmness in Izuku's eyes. He hated that the boy who used to follow him now seemed to exist on an entirely different plane of reality. But most of all, he hated the absolute, undeniable proof of his own inferiority. It came to a head on a sweltering Tuesday afternoon. A young boy with a minor extending fingers quirk was backed against the brick wall of the school building. Katsuki stood in front of him, palms popping with miniature, threatening explosions. His 2 lackeys stood behind him, snickering. You're in my way, extra, Katsuki growled, smoke curling from his fingers. I told you this was my wall to practice against. Move, before I fry you. The boy trembled, tears welling in his eyes. I was here first, Bakugo. I don't care, Katsuki yelled, pulling his right arm back. The sweat on his palm ignited, a volatile spark ready to detonate. He swung his hand forward, intending to blast the brick right next to the boy's head to scare him. The explosion never manifested. Katsuki's hand stopped dead in the air, a mere inch from the crying boy's face. It wasn't a physical block. No one had grabbed Katsuki's wrist. It felt as though his arm had been encased in invisible, impenetrable concrete. The kinetic force of his swing was completely absorbed by the empty air. The spark in his palm snuffed out instantly, suffocated by an unseen pressure. Katsuki's eyes widened. He yanked his arm back, but it wouldn't budge. He gritted his teeth, veins bulging in his neck as he strained with all his might. He was trapped. Kaken. The voice was soft, devoid of anger or mockery. It was entirely serene. Katsuki snapped his head to the side. Izuku was walking toward them, his hands tucked casually into the pockets of his shorts. His emerald eyes held a faint, luminescent glow. Let him go, Kaken, Izuku said, stopping a few feet away. Deku! Katsuki roared, his pride flaring into a blinding rage. Release me! Mind your own damn business. You're hurting him, Izuku replied simply. And you're angry. Your anger is making the air taste like ash. You need to calm down. Don't tell me what to do! Katsuki screamed. He channeled all his energy into his left hand, aiming it directly at Izuku. Die! A massive, fiery explosion erupted from Katsuki's palm, rocketing toward Izuku's face. It was a blast strong enough to severely burn an adult. The two lackeys shrieked and covered their heads. Izuku didn't flinch. He didn't even raise his hands. Less than a foot from Izuku's face, the explosion collided with a spherical, invisible barrier. The raging fire, the concussive shockwave, the deafening roar, all of it was instantly compressed, flattened against the shield of pure, unyielding force. The flames parted around Izuku like water breaking against the prow of a battleship, singing the grass on either side of him, but leaving him entirely untouched. The heat didn't even ruffle his green hair. When the smoke cleared, Izuku was still standing there, looking at Katsuki with an expression of profound pity. Your fire is strong, Kaken, Izuku said softly. But it only burns outward. You don't have control over it. Katsuki was panting, his eyes wide with a mixture of horror and absolute fury. He was completely immobilized now, both arms pinned to his sides by the invisible grip of Izuku's mind. He was a prisoner in his own body, utterly helpless against a boy who hadn't taken a single fighting stance. Stop looking at me like that! Katsuki shouted, tears of frustration prickling his eyes. Stop looking down on me! I'm not looking down on you, Izuku said, walking forward. He stopped right in front of Katsuki. I'm looking at you. You want to be a hero, like All Might. Heroes protect people. They don't bully them. If you keep letting your anger rule you, you're going to hurt someone you can't fix. Izuku blinked, and the glow in his eyes faded. Instantly, the crushing pressure vanished. Katsuki stumbled forward, catching himself on his hands and knees. He gasped for air, his whole body trembling from the adrenaline and the terrifying realization of his own impotence. Izuku turned to the crying boy against the wall. Are you okay? The boy nodded frantically and bolted away across the playground. Izuku looked down at Katsuki one last time. I don't want to fight you, Kaken. Ever. Please don't make me stop you again. With that, Izuku turned and walked back to his spot under the oak tree. Katsuki remained on his hands and knees in the grass, his pride shattered into a million irreparable pieces. From that day forward, the bullying ceased. Katsuki Bakugo still harbored a fiery, volatile temperament, but whenever Izuku Midoriya was in the room, a chilling silence would fall over him. The apex predator of the playground had been dethroned by a god who refused to wear a crown. As Izuku grew older, the true horror of his power became glaringly apparent. It wasn't the telekinesis. Lifting cars, shattering boulders, bending steel, those were parlor tricks. They required minimal effort, mere afterthoughts to the boy. The real danger was the omniscient awareness. The Force, as Izuku came to understand it through years of silent suffering and observation, was a living, breathing energy field. It bound the galaxy together, and Izuku's mind was permanently hardwired into its mainframe. By the time he was 10, the sensory overload had nearly driven him insane. If he walked through a crowded mall, he didn't just hear conversations. He felt the crushing anxiety of a businessman worried about his mortgage. He tasted the bitter jealousy of a teenager looking at a rival. He felt the sharp, stinging physical pain of an old woman's arthritis. When a stray cat died in the alley behind his apartment, Izuku woke up screaming, feeling the cold emptiness of a life extinguishing in the Force. Every emotion, every intent, every ripple of life and death in a 5-mile radius constantly battered against his consciousness like a hurricane. He developed chronic migraines. He stopped eating. He withdrew from his peers, spending days locked in his bedroom in the dark, clutching his head and crying as the agonizing symphony of the world threatened to tear his mind apart. Inko took him to a dozen specialists. Psychologists, Quirk counselors, telepathy experts. None of them could help. They suggested Quirk suppressant drugs, but the medication did absolutely nothing. The drugs targeted biological Quirk factors. Izuku's power existed outside of biology. It was during one of his darkest, most agonizing days that Izuku found his salvation. He was sitting on his bed, the roar of a distant traffic accident echoing in his mind. He could feel the panic of the drivers, the scent of burning rubber, the sharp sting of shattered glass. He was weeping, gripping his hair. Make it stop. Make it stop. Please make it stop. In his desperation, he stopped trying to fight the noise. He stopped trying to build a wall against the ocean. Instead, he forced his body to relax. He crossed his legs. He rested his hands on his knees. He closed his eyes and focused entirely on his own breathing. In, out. He visualized himself not as a wall resisting the storm, but as a stone sitting at the bottom of a rushing river. The water, the emotions, the pain, the noise flowed over him, around him, but it did not move him. He detached himself from the physical sensation. I am here. The pain is there. It is not my pain. I acknowledge it, and I let it pass. Slowly, miraculously, the deafening roar of the world began to fade. The overwhelming tide of empathic agony receded, leaving behind a tranquil, shimmering silence. When Izuku opened his eyes, he gasped. Every object in his bedroom, his all-might action figures, his books, his desk chair, his bed, even himself, was floating lazily in midair, suspended by the ambient, peaceful aura he had just projected. From that day forward, Izuku Midoriya became a monk. He didn't find the teachings in any religious text, nor did he have a master to guide him. He formulated his own philosophy through raw necessity. To survive his own power, he had to master his emotions. If he allowed himself to feel intense anger, the resulting shockwave of force energy could flatten his apartment building. If he gave in to despair, the suffocating aura could paralyze his mother. He developed a code. A set of internal mantras that kept his mind tethered and his heart shielded. Emotion yet peace. Ignorance yet knowledge. Passion yet serenity. Chaos yet harmony. He began waking up at 4 a.m. every day to meditate. He would sit in the center of his room, levitating himself 3 feet off the ground, and cast his awareness out into the city. He learned to filter the noise. He categorized the hums of the universe. He learned to identify the spike of danger, a precognitive tingle at the base of his skull that warned him of threats before they happened. He realized that his power was intimately tied to his emotional state. There was a light way to use it, guided by calmness, compassion, and a desire to protect. When he operated in the light, the force felt like a warm, supportive current. But there was also a dark aspect. He had felt its seductive pull a few times. When Katsuki had tried to blast that boy, Izuku had felt a momentary urge to simply crush Katsuki's hands, to permanently disable the threat. Doing so would have been effortless. The dark side offered immediate, absolute control fueled by righteous anger. But Izuku recognized the terrifying slope of that path. If he started imposing his will on others through violence, with the level of power he possessed, he wouldn't be a hero. He would become a tyrant. A god ruling through fear. So, he buried the dark. He built ironclad mental vaults to store his negative emotions, promising himself he would never use his power to harm, only to defend and disarm. He studied martial arts via internet videos, modifying the movements to accommodate his supernatural reflexes and speed. He learned that by coursing the force through his muscles, he could move faster than the human eye could track, leap buildings in a single bound, and reinforce his skin to withstand immense physical trauma. He didn't need to bulk up like All Might. His strength didn't come from his biceps, it came from the universe itself. Years slipped by, and the legend of Izuku Midoriya quietly morphed from a childhood playground myth into a deeply unsettling reality for the students and faculty of Aldera Junior High. By the age of 14, Izuku was a striking figure. He had grown tall, his posture impeccably straight, devoid of the nervous slouch typical of teenagers. His curly green hair was neatly kept, and his emerald eyes carried a perpetual calmness that was both comforting and profoundly intimidating. He rarely spoke unless spoken to, and when he did, his voice was measured, resonant, and carried a strange, compelling weight. He was the top student in the school, achieving perfect scores on every exam without seemingly breaking a sweat. Yet, he was socially isolated. Not because he was bullied. No one in their right mind would dare bully a boy who could theoretically collapse the school's roof with a sigh, but because he existed in a different atmosphere. Sitting in the back of his third-year classroom, Izuku stared out the window, his notebook open on his desk. He wasn't taking notes on the teacher's math lecture. He was sketching the flow of wind currents outside, visualizing the invisible lines of energy that dictated the weather. Since you're all third years, it's time for you to think seriously about your futures, the homeroom teacher announced, waving a stack of career aptitude forms. I'll pass out these printouts, but why bother? I know you all want to go to the hero course. The classroom erupted in cheers, students firing off minor quirks, glowing hands, stretchy fingers, small bursts of water. Yes, you all have wonderful quirks, the teacher laughed. But remember, using powers in school is against the rules. In the front row, Katsuki Bakugo leaned back in his chair, propping his feet on the desk. He scoffed loudly, the sound cutting through the chatter. Hey, teach, Katsuki drawled, a smirk playing on his lips. Don't lump me in with these background characters. They'll be lucky to end up as sidekicks to some busted D-lister. I'm the real deal. The class erupted in offended shouts. You think you're better than us, Bakugo? Shut up, extras! Katsuki barked, tiny explosions popping in his palms. I aced the mock tests. I'm the only one here with the stuff for UA High. I'm gonna surpass All Might and become the top hero. The teacher looked at his clipboard. Oh, you are aiming for UA, Bakugo. That's impressive. Their acceptance rate is incredibly low. Katsuki grinned, standing up on his desk to gloat. That's exactly why it's the only place for me. I'm gonna be a legend. Oh, right, the teacher added, pushing his glasses up his nose. Midoriya wants to go to UA too, right? The classroom fell dead silent. It was a suffocating, heavy silence. Every head in the room turned slowly toward the back corner, where Izuku was still gazing out the window. No one laughed. No one mocked him. In a normal timeline, they would have ridiculed the quirkless boy for daring to dream. But in this timeline, they knew. They all remembered an incident in their first year when a runaway truck had careened toward a group of crossing students. Izuku hadn't even run to them. He had simply raised a hand from the sidewalk, and the 10-ton truck had slammed into an invisible, immovable wall, its rear end kicking up into the air before slamming back down. Izuku had caught the truck, saved the students, and walked to school without a change in his heartbeat. Katsuki's smirk vanished. His jaw clenched so tight his teeth audibly ground together. He slowly stepped down from his desk, his fists shaking. He hated that silence. He hated the absolute, unspoken consensus of the entire room. Bakugo is strong, but Midoriya is a god. Midoriya, the teacher said nervously. You're aiming for the hero course? Izuku finally turned his attention from the window to the classroom. He didn't look arrogant. He didn't look boastful. He just looked serene. Yes, sir, Izuku said softly. I believe it is the most efficient path for me to help people. Katsuki slammed his hands down on his desk, the wood cracking under the force. Hey, Deku! He snarled, his voice trembling with a mix of rage and an inferiority complex that had festered for a decade. You think you can just waltz into UA? You think whatever the hell your power is, makes you a hero? You don't even try. You look down on everyone. Izuku met Katsuki's furious crimson gaze. Through the force, Izuku felt the hurricane of Katsuki's emotions. The blinding insecurity. The desperate need for validation. The terror of irrelevance. I don't look down on anyone, Kaken, Izuku said, his voice carrying clearly across the quiet room. Power doesn't make a hero. The will to sacrifice oneself for others does. I am going to UA, to learn how to apply my abilities properly. We can both be heroes. Don't patronize me. Katsuki yelled, taking a step toward the back of the room. Suddenly, a massive tremor shook the school building. It wasn't a localized earthquake. Izuku's precognition, his danger sense, flared violently at the base of his skull, a sharp, piercing alarm. The fluorescent lights above flickered and popped. Before anyone could react, a deafening explosion echoed from the street outside, followed by the sound of shattering glass and screaming pedestrians. An attack! Someone yelled. A villain is outside. The students panicked, scrambling toward the windows. Down below, a massive, gelatinous sludge monster had erupted from the sewer grates in the middle of the shopping district, thrashing wildly and destroying storefronts. Everyone stay calm. Remain in the classroom. The teacher shouted, visibly panicking himself. Katsuki sneered, his combat instincts kicking in. A villain? Perfect warm-up. He bolted toward the door. But before Katsuki could grab the handle, the door slid shut with a resounding slam. Katsuki yanked on the handle. It wouldn't budge. He looked back, furious. Izuku was standing at his desk. His hand was casually raised, pointing 2 fingers toward the door. The emerald glow had returned to his eyes, illuminating his face with a divine, terrifying light. Move, Deku! Katsuki roared. I'm going to take that bastard down. No, you aren't, Izuku said calmly. His voice wasn't loud, but it echoed with a strange, reverberating authority that compelled everyone in the room to freeze. It was a subtle application of a mind trick, an empathic suggestion forcing them to yield. Your quirk is explosive. The villain is made of a liquid substance. Using your explosions in a crowded civilian area will cause collateral damage and potentially ignite the nearby gas lines. I don't care. Release the door. I cannot let you endanger civilians out of a desire for glory, Kaken, Izuku said. Izuku turned his gaze to the window. He could feel the sludge villain perfectly. He could feel the chaotic, malicious intent, the desperate need for a host's body, the sloshing, vile mass of its form. He could also feel the terror of the civilians trapped beneath its tendrils. Teacher, Izuku said, not breaking eye contact with the villain down below. Please keep the students inside. It is not safe. Midoriya, what are you doing? The teacher stammered. Get away from the window. Leave it to the pros. Izuku didn't answer. He simply placed a hand on the glass pane of the 3rd-story window. Push. The entire pane of glass didn't shatter. It popped cleanly out of its frame and drifted to the side, hovering in midair. The wind from the street rushed into the classroom, blowing Izuku's green curls back. He stepped onto the windowsill, looking down at the chaos 3 stories below. Deku, don't you dare! Katsuki screamed, realizing what Izuku was about to do. Don't steal this from me. Izuku glanced back over his shoulder. The glowing serenity in his eyes silenced Katsuki's rage instantly. May the force be with you all, Izuku murmured softly, and then, he stepped off the ledge. He didn't fall. He plummeted with purpose. The wind roared in his ears, but his mind was absolute stillness. As he plummeted toward the chaotic street below, Izuku extended both his hands, tapping into the boundless, infinite well of energy that hummed beneath the surface of reality. It was time to introduce the world to the true power of the force. The air above the shopping district in Muzurifu was thick with the acrid scent of burning plastic and the metallic tang of ruptured sewage lines. Below, the street had been transformed into a war zone. The sludge villain, a massive, undulating mass of toxic green slime and hateful yellow eyes, thrashed wildly, its viscous tendrils smashing into storefronts and tearing up the asphalt. Pro-heroes had already arrived on the scene, but they were paralyzed by the tactical nightmare of the situation. Death Arms, a hero with immense physical strength, was coughing violently, unable to get close without suffocating on the toxic fumes. Kamui Woods had tried to bind the villain, but the villain's acidic composition was eating through his wooden lacquered branches. Mount Lady stood at the intersection, frustrated and useless, the two-lane street too narrow for her gigantified form without crushing civilian buildings. Stay back. The villain has hostages. Wait, no, he's just lashing out. Keep the perimeter secure. Death Arms bellowed, holding back the terrified crowd of onlookers. High above the chaos, unnoticed by the screaming civilians and the panicked heroes, a figure plummeted from the sky. Izuku Midoriya did not flinch as the wind roared past his ears. His school uniform fluttered wildly, his green tie snapping against his chest. He was falling from a 3-story window, a drop that would easily shatter the legs of a normal human. But Izuku was not normal, and he was not falling so much as he was directing his descent. He closed his eyes, tuning out the cacophony of the sirens and the screams. He focused on the energy of the planet, the gravitational pull beneath him. In. Out. He didn't fight the gravity. He negotiated with it. 50 feet. 30 feet. 10 feet. Izuku opened his eyes, the irises burning with a brilliant, ethereal emerald light. He extended his legs, and as his red sneakers made contact with the shattered asphalt, there was no bone-crunching impact. There was no crater. There was only a profound, echoing thrum in the air, a localized drop in atmospheric pressure that rippled outward in a 10-foot radius. The kinetic energy of his terminal velocity was instantly absorbed and redirected by the force, blowing the dust and debris away in a perfect, silent circle. Izuku stood up straight, brushing a speck of dust from his shoulder. The arrival of the boy instantly caught the attention of the pro-heroes. Hey! Kid! What are you doing? Death Arms roared, his eyes wide with horror. Get out of there! Are you crazy? Kamui Woods reached out with a desperate branch. Run, boy! It's too dangerous. The sludge villain paused its rampage, its massive, liquid body towering 15 feet above Izuku. It swirled its gelatinous mass, forming a jagged, mocking mouth. Well, well, did they drop a snack from the sky? Or maybe a new meat suit? You look sturdy enough, kid. Let me borrow your body. A massive, whip-like tendril of toxic sludge, thick as a tree trunk and capable of crushing a car, lashed out toward Izuku's head with blinding speed. The crowd screamed. Mount Lady covered her mouth. Izuku didn't move his feet. He didn't adopt a martial arts stance. He simply looked at the incoming attack and raised his right hand, his palm facing the villain. He didn't push with his muscles. He pushed with his mind. Boom. The sound was not an explosion of fire or chemicals. It was the sound of space itself being violently displaced. A localized wave of pure, concentrated telekinetic energy erupted from Izuku's palm. It hit the sludge tendril not like a physical wall, but like a localized hurricane. The villain's attack didn't just stop, it disintegrated. The toxic sludge was instantly vaporized by the sheer pressure, scattered into a fine mist of harmless green droplets. The force of the push continued, striking the main body of the villain. What the? The sludge villain gurgled, its yellow eyes widening in sudden, uncomprehending terror. The villain's massive, 15-foot form was violently blasted backward. It was a perfect, spherical concussive wave. The villain's liquid body was completely splattered, torn apart into hundreds of individual, screaming blobs of slime that plastered against the brick walls of the alleyway, the overturned cars, and the pavement. Absolute silence fell over the street. The sirens seemed to fade into the background. The pro-heroes stood frozen like statues, their jaws practically hitting the floor. Death Arms rubbed his eyes, unable to process what he had just witnessed. A middle school boy, wearing a standard black Gakuin uniform, had just instantly neutralized a villain that a half-dozen trained professionals couldn't touch, and he had done it with a single, casual wave of his hand. But Izuku wasn't finished. He could feel the villain's consciousness still active in the scattered puddles. It was trying to reform, oozing slowly together. You are a danger to these people, Izuku said softly, though in the unnatural silence, his voice carried clearly to every ear present. I will not allow you to spread. Izuku raised both of his hands, bringing them together in a slow, sweeping motion, as if he were shaping clay on a potter's wheel. The air pressure in the alleyway shifted dramatically. The wind began to howl, swirling inward toward a central point directly in front of Izuku. The pro-heroes watched in absolute awe as every single drop of the toxic sludge was forcefully peeled off the brickwork, the asphalt, and the cars. The slime shrieked as it was dragged through the air, completely unable to resist the invisible, godlike grip that had seized it. The puddles merged in midair, swirling into a tight, dense sphere. Izuku clenched his hands into loose fists, compressing the space. The sphere of air surrounding the villain hardened into an impenetrable, invisible barrier. The sludge thrashed inside its transparent prison, completely contained, compressed into a ball no larger than a beach ball. Izuku lowered his hands. The sphere floated gently over to him, hovering obediently at his side like a balloon tied to his wrist. The boy's glowing eyes faded back to their normal, tranquil green. He turned toward the dumbfounded pro-heroes, his expression polite and completely unbothered. "The area is secure," Izuku said calmly. "Who should I give this to?" Death Arms opened his mouth, closed it, and opened it again. He looked from the compressed ball of villain to the 14-year-old boy. You what?" Before the pros could snap out of their stupor and launch into the mandatory lecture about vigilantism and unauthorized quirk usage, a massive figure landed at the entrance of the alley with a booming thud that shook the ground. "I am here!" The towering, muscular form of All Might, the #1 hero, the symbol of peace, stood in the sunlight, his signature golden hair swept back, a massive, reassuring smile plastered across his face. He had a plastic grocery bag hanging from his wrist. He looked ready to unleash a localized tornado with a Texas smash. "Fear not, citizens, for I, All Might, froze." He looked at the devastated street. He looked at the pro-heroes. Then, his blue eyes locked onto the small, green-haired boy standing calmly in the center of the destruction, a perfectly spherical, floating prison of compressed air hovering beside him. Inside the sphere, the sludge villain, who had slipped away from All Might earlier that day, was pressing its eyes against the invisible barrier in sheer panic. All Might's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. His brilliant mind, honed by decades of combat, instantly analyzed the scene. There were no scorch marks, no impact craters around the boy. The villain was contained not by a physical material, but by an absolute mastery of physics. This boy did this? All Might thought, feeling a rare shiver run down his immense spine. All Might, Izuku said, bowing respectfully. "It is an honor to meet you. I believe this villain belongs to you." Izuku gently tapped his finger in the air. The invisible sphere floated gracefully across the street, coming to a dead stop exactly 3 inches from All Might's massive chest. All Might stared at the sphere. He reached out and grabbed it. It felt like holding a bowling ball made of solid titanium. The sheer concentration of power required to maintain this construct was staggering. "Young man," All Might said, his voice dropping slightly from its usual booming theater. "What is your name?" "Midoriya Izuku, sir." "Midoriya." All Might repeated, committing it to memory. Suddenly, Death Arms snapped out of his shock and marched forward, his face turning red. "Listen here, kid. I don't care how powerful your quirk is, you can't just jump into a villain fight. It's incredibly dangerous, it's against the law, and you could have enough." The single word from All Might wasn't shouted, but it carried an undeniable, crushing authority. Death Arms stepped back, swallowing hard. The boy acted with precision, control, and zero collateral damage, All Might said, looking intensely at Izuku. "He did what none of us were able to do today. He saved lives." All Might stepped forward, placing a massive, heavy hand on Izuku's shoulder. When skin met fabric, both of them felt it. All Might felt an ocean. A bottomless, infinite well of energy that hummed with a terrifying, ancient peace. It made the immense, stockpiled power of One for All burning inside his chest feel like a single match struck in the middle of a hurricane. Izuku felt the dying sun. He felt the colossal, radiant warmth of All Might's soul, the sheer, unbroken willpower of the symbol of peace. But beneath that blinding light, Izuku's force empathy felt the agony. He felt the shattered respiratory system, the missing stomach, the life force bleeding out of the man drop by drop. Izuku looked up into All Might's eyes. You are in pain, he whispered softly, so only the hero could hear. You are dying. All Might's pupils shrank to pinpricks. The smile remained, but the eyes revealed profound shock. Walk with me, young Midoriya, All Might said quietly. The sun was beginning to set, casting long, golden shadows across the quiet residential streets of Mizurufu. The media frenzy had been successfully avoided, with All Might using his immense speed to whisk Izuku away from the reporters before they could swarm the boy. They walked in silence until they reached a secluded park, bathed in the orange glow of the twilight. Suddenly, a cloud of steam erupted from All Might's massive frame. Izuku didn't flinch or show surprise. Through the force, he had already sensed the duality of the man's physical form. When the steam cleared, the towering, muscle-bound god of justice was gone. In his place stood a skeletal, emaciated man with sunken eyes and clothes that hung off him like a scarecrow. Toshinori Yagi coughed, wiping a speck of blood from his chin. He looked down at the boy, waiting for the inevitable shock, the screaming, the denial. Izuku merely blinked. Your energy is the same. The shell is just fractured. Toshinori sighed, a sound of immense exhaustion. He lifted his baggy t-shirt, revealing the horrific, spider-webbed scar that covered the entire left side of his chest. 5 years ago. A villain did this to me. My respiratory system was nearly destroyed. I lost my stomach. I can only do hero work for about 3 hours a day now. You wear a mask to keep the world from panicking, Izuku observed, his voice steady. The symbol of peace cannot bleed. Exactly, Toshinori said, lowering his shirt. He leaned against the railing, looking out at the city. There is a secret behind my power, young Midoriya. My quirk is not a natural mutation. It is a sacred torch, passed from one generation to the next. It is called One for All. Toshinori looked at Izuku, his sunken eyes burning with a desperate intensity. For months, I have been searching for a successor. Someone with the heart of a hero, someone who could inherit this power and become the next pillar for society to lean on. He pointed a bony finger at Izuku. When I saw you standing in that alleyway, completely unbothered, commanding a power I couldn't even comprehend, I realized something. You have the heart. You have the instinct to save. But, Toshinori chuckled darkly, if I tried to give you my power, I think it would be like pouring a glass of water into the Pacific Ocean. Izuku looked down at his hands. My power, it isn't a quirk, All Might. The doctors call it telekinesis, but that's a lie. It's the force. It's the energy between all living things. I don't generate it. I just ask it to move, and it listens. It listens to you because your heart is pure, Toshinori said softly. He stepped forward, dropping to one knee so he was eye level with the 14-year-old. Young Midoriya. You do not need One for All. In truth, I believe your power far eclipses my own in my prime. But raw power does not make a symbol. It makes a weapon. Izuku's emerald eyes widened slightly. For the first time, a crack of genuine, youthful vulnerability showed through his monk-like facade. I know. I am terrified of it. I can hear everyone's pain. If I lose control, I could hurt everyone. Toshinori placed his hands on Izuku's shoulders. That fear is what proves you are good. You have the power of a god, but you need the guidance of a man. You want to go to UA High, don't you? Yes. Then let me train you, Toshinori offered, his smile returning, not the exaggerated grin of his muscle form, but a genuine, gentle smile. Not to build your muscles, or increase your power, but to teach you how to carry the burden. How to inspire hope, not just awe. How to be a pro-hero in a world of laws and men. Let me be your mentor, Izuku Midoriya. Izuku stared at the skeletal man. For 10 years, he had carried the weight of the universe alone. He had built walls of ice around his heart to keep the noise out. But looking into Toshinori's eyes, he felt a warmth that pierced straight through the ice. Izuku bowed deeply, the tears he had held back for a decade finally pricking the corners of his eyes. I would be honored, Sensei. The 10 months leading up to the UA entrance exam were traditionally a time of grueling physical conditioning for aspiring heroes. For Toshinori and Izuku, it was a time of intense philosophical debate and mental refinement. Tashinori had initially brought Izuku to Dagoba Municipal Beach Park, a coastline completely buried under mountains of illegal trash. The plan was to have Izuku physically haul the trash to build stamina, a classic hero training montage. They stood at the edge of the sand, looking at refrigerators, rusted cars, and mountains of tires. "This will be your training ground," Tashinori announced in his skeletal form, bundled in an oversized coat against the autumn chill. "To serve the community while building your physical vessel." Izuku looked at the trash. He closed his eyes. Young Midoriya?" Tashinori asked. "You're supposed to start lifting." "I am," Izuku replied calmly. The air pressure dropped. The familiar, terrifying thrum of the force vibrated across the beach. Suddenly, the trash began to rattle. Then, a rusty microwave floated into the air. A split second later, a pickup truck joined it. Tashinori's jaw dropped as he watched an entire half-mile stretch of garbage, hundreds of tons of rusted metal, plastic, and debris, silently levitate 50 feet into the air. The sheer scale of it was apocalyptic, yet the execution was utterly peaceful. Izuku raised his hands, gracefully directing the massive cloud of junk. With a sweeping gesture, he flew the entire mass over to the municipal recycling center 2 miles away, gently depositing it into perfectly sorted piles of metal, plastic, and glass, out of sight. Within 2 minutes the beach was pristine. The white sand gleamed under the morning sun. The ocean waves crashed softly against the cleared shore. Izuku opened his eyes and turned back to a paralyzed Tashinori. "The environment is clean, sensei. What is the next lesson?" Tashinori stared at the empty beach, a drop of sweat rolling down his forehead. He cleared it in 2 minutes. The whole thing. He didn't even break a sweat. Tashinori cleared his throat, trying to regain his composure. "Right. Well, it appears your output is sufficient. Sit down, Izuku. Today, we talk about the legalities of the Quirk restriction laws." And so, the 10 months were spent on the mind. Tashinori taught Izuku the history of the Hero Public Safety Commission. He taught him about the psychological impact of collateral damage. He taught him how to smile, not a calm, detached monk's smile, but a warm, human smile that told victims, "I am here, and you are safe." Izuku absorbed the knowledge like a sponge. For the first time, his omniscience wasn't a burden, it was a tool. He learned to project his own calmness outward, creating a force aura that passively reduced the heart rates of panicked people around him. By the time the morning of the UA entrance exam arrived, Izuku Midoriya was not just a vessel of infinite power. He was a sharpened, highly educated instrument of peace. The towering H-shaped building of UA High School gleamed in the late February sunlight. Thousands of aspiring students swarmed the gates, the nervous energy in the air so thick it was palpable. Izuku walked through the crowd, completely unbothered. He didn't wear his middle school uniform. He wore a simple, flexible black athletic suit, designed to not restrict his movement. His mind was serene, a placid lake reflecting the chaotic emotions of the teenagers around him. He sensed Katsuki Bakugo walking a few yards ahead, radiating a spiked aura of intense aggression and focus. Izuku let him be. Suddenly, he felt a sharp spike of anxiety to his right. A girl with a round face and short brown hair tripped over her own feet, falling face first toward the concrete. Before gravity could claim her, she stopped midair. Achiko Uraraka squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the impact, but felt herself floating horizontally. She gasped, looking around, expecting to see she had activated her own zero-gravity quirk by mistake, but her fingertips weren't glowing. Izuku walked over, effortlessly holding her in suspension with the force. He gently rotated her upright and set her softly on her feet. "Are you all right?" Izuku asked, his voice smooth and calming. Achiko stared at the boy with the curly green hair, her cheeks flushing completely red. You stopped me." "Thank you. Was that telekinesis?" "That's so cool. It was no trouble." "It is bad luck to fall before an exam." Izuku smiled, a genuine, warm smile he had practiced with Tashinori. "Good luck today." He bowed slightly and continued walking, leaving the utterly flustered Uraraka staring after him. The written exam was trivial. Izuku's precognitive abilities allowed him to intuitively sense the correct paths of logic for complex math and physics questions, while his own genius-level intellect handled the rest. He finished the 2-hour exam in 20 minutes, spending the remaining time meditating in his seat, ignoring the baffled stares of the proctors. Then came the orientation for the practical exam. The massive auditorium was packed. Pro-hero Present Mike stood on the stage, screaming into the microphone, explaining the points system involving 3 types of villain robots. Suddenly, a tall boy with glasses and an incredibly rigid posture stood up, his arms slicing through the air. "Excuse me. I have a question. Hit me, listener." Present Mike pointed. "On the printout, there are 4 types of villains, not 3. The boy Tenya Ida shouted. "If this is a misprint, you should be ashamed. We are top-tier applicants, not fools." Furthermore, Ida turned, pointing accusingly toward the back of the room. "You, with the green hair. You have been sitting with your eyes closed, completely motionless for the entire presentation. If you are asleep and not taking this seriously, leave at once." The spotlight of the room shifted to Izuku. Katsuki, sitting 2 rows ahead, slouched in his seat and muttered, "You idiot with the glasses, you're picking a fight with the wrong guy." Izuku opened his eyes. They glowed faintly in the dim auditorium. He didn't stand up. He simply looked at Ida. Through the force, Izuku projected a wave of absolute, undeniable tranquility directly at the aggressive teen. Ida's rigid posture instantly collapsed. The tension drained from his muscles. The righteous indignation in his mind evaporated, replaced by a profound sense of foolishness and peace. Ida blinked, suddenly feeling as though he were standing in a quiet temple garden rather than a loud auditorium. "I apologize if my meditation offended you," Izuku said, his voice carrying perfectly across the silent room without a microphone. "I was merely centering my mind for the trial ahead. And regarding the 4th robot, if you look closely at the fine print, it is a 0-pointer. An obstacle to be avoided. Let us focus on the task at hand." Ida swallowed hard, utterly disarmed. "I see. Thank you for the clarification. I apologize for my outburst." He sat down quickly. Present Mike blinked behind his orange shades. "Whoa. That kid just completely neutered Ida's momentum without raising his voice." Right. What the green kid said. "The 4th robot is a massive obstacle. Avoid it. Now head to your assigned gates." Plus Ultra. Test Center B was a massive, sprawling mock-up of a modern city. Hundreds of applicants stood before the towering metal gates, stretching, hyping themselves up, and vibrating with adrenaline. Izuku stood at the back of the pack, his hands resting easily at his sides. "Start." Present Mic's voice boomed from the loudspeakers. The applicants exploded forward like a stampede of wild animals, screaming battle cries as they rushed into the city. Izuku didn't run. He took a deep breath, feeling the pulse of the machines, the flow of the electrical currents hiding in the concrete walls. He began to walk. His pace was leisurely, a stark contrast to the frantic sprinting of everyone else. In the dark observation room hidden deep within UA, the faculty of heroes watched the dozens of monitors. Quite a lively bunch this year, Midnight purred, crossing her legs. Indeed, Principal Niza squeaked, sipping from a teacup. "Any standouts?" Eraserhead, Shota Aizawa, narrowed his bloodshot eyes, staring intently at Monitor 4. "Look at the kid in the black suit. Midoriya. He's not running." On the screen, a massive 2-pointer robot burst through a brick wall directly in front of Izuku, its red optical sensors locking onto the walking boy. Target acquired. Izuku didn't break his stride. He didn't even take his hands out of his pockets. As the massive robot raised its steel fist to crush him, Izuku simply looked at it. Force crush. The robot froze. A horrific screech of rending metal echoed through the fake street. Without a single finger being laid upon it, the 2-ton machine violently crumpled inward. Its chest cavity imploded, its arms snapped backward, and its head was crushed into a jagged cube of scrap metal. It sparked wildly and crashed to the ground dead. Izuku stepped smoothly over the wreckage and continued walking. In the observation room, Nizu dropped his teacup. It shattered on the floor, spilling hot tea over his paws, but the principal didn't notice. Aizawa leaned so far forward his nose almost touched the screen. What quirk is that? Vlad King gasped. Invisible telekinesis? The sheer pressure required to crush titanium plating instantly. On the monitors, Izuku's path of destruction became legendary. He walked down the center of the main avenue. Whenever a robot appeared, it was instantly dealt with. A three-pointer fired a barrage of rubber missiles. Izuku waved a hand, and the missiles reversed trajectory, obliterating the machine that fired them. A swarm of one-pointers ambushed him from an alley. Izuku didn't look, he just snapped his fingers. A localized force repulse blasted outward, tearing the robots into spare parts that rained down harmlessly. He's not fighting, Aizawa muttered, his tired eyes wide with disbelief. He's exterminating them. He's moving with complete situational awareness. It's like he can see them before they even spawn. He has 60 points already, Midnight whispered. It's only been 4 minutes. Tashinori, standing in the back of the room in his skeletal form, smiled proudly. Show them, young Midoriya. Show them the peace you bring. Down in the city, the applicants were beginning to notice. They watched in horror and awe as the green-haired boy strolled past them, surrounded by a terrifying aura of invincibility. Robots were spontaneously crushing themselves before the other students could even activate their quirks. This is insane, a boy with a hardening quirk muttered, lowering his rocky fists as a three-pointer was casually tossed over a 5-story building by Izuku. Who is this guy? Izuku stopped at an intersection. He had stopped counting his points. He knew he had passed. He closed his eyes, extending his senses to make sure none of the other applicants were critically injured. Then, the ground trembled. It wasn't a slight vibration. It was an earthquake. The towering skyscrapers of the mock city literally shook, glass shattering from the upper-level windows. At the end of the main avenue, a shadow eclipsed the sun, the zero-pointer. It was a colossal, terrifying monstrosity, easily the size of a 20-story building. Its massive treads crushed the asphalt into powder. As its monolithic head breached the skyline, its singular, glowing red eye swept over the terrified applicants. Less than 2 minutes remaining. President Mick's voice crackled. The applicants screamed. The bravado of the hero hopefuls vanished instantly, replaced by primal survival instinct. They turned and ran. Run! That thing's impossible to beat. Izuku opened his eyes. He felt the panic of the crowd. He felt the terrifying mass of the machine. But more importantly, his precognition flared like a supernova. Pain. Fear. Imminent death. Izuku snapped his head to the left. 50 yards away, trapped beneath a massive slab of concrete displaced by the zero-pointer's treads, was the girl from the entrance. Achiko Uraraka. Her leg was pinned. She was crying, desperately trying to push the rock away as the colossal shadow of the machine fell over her. The zero-pointer raised a foot the size of a house, preparing to step forward. If it brought its tread down, it wouldn't just crush the rubble. It would pulverize the girl beneath it. Izuku Midoriya's calm facade vanished. The serene monk was replaced by the terrifying wrath of a protector. Izuku crouched low to the ground. He channeled the raw, unfiltered power of the force directly into his muscular and skeletal systems. The air around him visibly warped, shimmering with a blinding, emerald aura. He pushed off. The resulting sonic boom shattered every remaining window within a 2-block radius. The asphalt beneath his feet exploded into a crater 10 feet deep. Izuku launched himself into the air like a surface-to-air missile, moving so fast he was nothing but a blur of green light. In the observation room, Aizawa gripped the console, his knuckles turning white. His physical specs just spiked to impossible levels. What is his quirk? Izuku rocketed hundreds of feet into the air, ascending until he was level with the colossal head of the zero-pointer. He hung there in the sky, suspended by the force, his school tracksuit fluttering wildly. The massive machine's red optical sensor locked onto the tiny human floating in front of its face. Izuku glared down at the unfeeling metal monstrosity. He raised both of his hands, his fingers curled into claws, pulling back as if gathering the invisible reins of a storm. You are in my way, Izuku roared, his voice amplified by the force, rolling across the fake city like thunder. He threw both hands forward. This was not a gentle push. This was not a controlled sweep. This was a massive, concentrated telekinetic strike fueled by righteous fury. When the invisible payload hit the zero-pointer, the impact was cataclysmic. The colossal machine didn't just fall backward. Its head was violently compressed inward, the thick armor plating folding like tissue paper. The sheer kinetic force traveled down its neck, shattering its internal support structures. A shockwave rippled through the air, flattening the dust and creating a massive ring of displaced clouds in the sky above. The zero-pointer was physically lifted off its treads by the blow. The thousands of tons of metal were blasted backward, flipping entirely over before crashing into the fake city limits with an earth-shattering boom. The resulting dust cloud engulfed the entire avenue. When the dust finally settled, the applicants who had stopped running stared in absolute, paralyzing disbelief. The 20-story machine was completely annihilated. It lay in ruins, completely flattened, smoke billowing from its crushed chassis. Izuku drifted down from the sky, landing softly beside the trapped Uraraka without making a sound. The green glow faded from his eyes, and the serene calmness returned to his face. He waved a hand over the massive concrete slab pinning the girl's leg. The slab silently lifted into the air and was tossed aside. Achiko stared up at the boy, her mouth open, tears streaming down her dust-covered face. She had thought she was dead. She had thought a god had descended from the heavens to save her. "Are you severely injured?" Izuku asked gently, offering her a hand. My ankle," she stammered, taking his hand. Izuku pulled her up effortlessly. He placed a hand on her injured ankle. He didn't have a healing quirk like Recovery Girl, but he could manipulate blood flow and accelerate cellular stability through the force. A warm, soothing sensation washed over Achiko's leg. The pain instantly subsided. "Time's up!" President Mike screamed, his voice cracking over the speakers. The buzzer blared across the facility. Izuku nodded to Achiko, stepping back. "Rest now. The trial is over." In the observation room, the silence was absolute. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Principal Nizu slowly picked up a towel and wiped the spilled tea from his paws. He looked at the final scoreboard displayed on the main monitor. Midoriya Izuku, villain points, 110. Rescue points, 60. Total, 170. It wasn't just a new school record. It was an anomaly that broke the grading system entirely. Aizawa Shoda stared at the screen, a chilling realization settling in his gut. He was a hero who erased power, but looking at the devastation Izuku had wrought without shedding a single drop of sweat, Aizawa knew, with absolute certainty, that whatever Izuku Midoriya was wielding, was beyond erasure. "Gentlemen," Nizu said softly, his beady eyes gleaming with a mix of excitement and deep trepidation. "I believe the hierarchy of our world has just been permanently rewritten. The Force had officially arrived at UA High School. The universe is not silent. To the average human, the space between things, the empty air in a room, the void between stars, the gap between two heartbeats, is nothing but a quiet absence. But to Izuku Midoriya, the universe was a deafening symphony." At 5 a.m. on the first day of his high school career, Izuku sat cross-legged in the center of his bedroom, hovering exactly 2 feet above the tatami mats. He was deep in meditation. Around him, the objects of his childhood, his All Might posters, his desk chair, a stray pencil, drifted in a slow, lazy orbit, caught in the residual gravitational field of his focused mind. Inhale. The hum of the city's power grid, a sharp, electric yellow note in his mind. Exhale. The gentle, rolling blue rhythm of his mother's heartbeat as she slept in the next room. He cast his awareness further. He felt the early morning commuters, their minds buzzing with mundane anxieties. He felt a flock of pigeons launching from a telephone wire 3 streets over. He felt the cold, creeping intent of a pickpocket in the subway station a mile away, quickly followed by the sharp spike of adrenaline from a patrolling police officer who caught him. Izuku breathed through it all, allowing the torrent of information to wash over him like a river over a smooth stone. He was the stone. He did not judge the water. He merely acknowledged its flow. Today, he would step into UA High School, the most prestigious hero academy on the planet. It was a crucible designed to test the limits of human biology and willpower. But Izuku knew his greatest test would not come from the curriculum, nor from the villains they trained to fight. His greatest test was restraint. He possessed a power that could shatter tectonic plates, yet he lived in a world made of glass. Slowly Izuku opened his eyes. The ethereal emerald glow faded from his irises, replaced by a soft, earthly green. The floating objects in his room settled back to their proper places without a single sound. He lowered himself to the floor, his bare feet touching the tatami. "Time to go," he whispered to the quiet room. The door to Class 1A was absurdly large, towering over the students who stood before it. Izuku paused outside, his hand resting on the metal handle. Through the thick steel, his force empathy was already painting a vivid picture of the chaotic energy inside. He felt the rigid, orderly, almost metallic aura of Tenya Ida. He felt the warm, bubbly, buoyant energy of Ochako Uraraka. He felt the chilling, bifurcated presence, one half burning hot, the other freezing cold, sitting near the back. And then, he felt the violent, roaring tempest of Katsuki Bakugo. Izuku slid the door open. "Take your feet off that desk at once." Ida's voice boomed across the classroom. The tall, bespectacled boy was chopping his arms through the air like a robotic metronome. "It is disrespectful to your classmates, and to the upperclassmen who used this desk before you." Katsuki sat with his feet propped up, leaning back in his chair with a scowl that could curdle milk. "Huh! What middle school did you go to, you extra? I'll put my feet wherever I damn well please. I am Tenya Ida, from Sumai Private Academy." "Sumai? Oh, an elite prick," Katsuki sneered, tiny sparks popping from his palms. "I'm gonna have fun crushing you." Ida gasped, genuinely scandalized. "Crushing me? You wish to be a hero, yet you speak like a villain." The rest of the class watched the exchange with a mixture of amusement and apprehension. But the moment Izuku stepped through the doorway, the atmosphere in the room violently shifted. It wasn't a conscious action on Izuku's part. It was simply the weight of his presence. To the students who didn't know him, it felt as though the air pressure in the room had suddenly dropped. The hairs on their arms stood on end, a primal, evolutionary response to the arrival of an apex predator. Katsuki's rant died in his throat. He snapped his head toward the door, his red eyes locking onto Izuku. The explosive boy's aura, which a second ago had been a raging bonfire, instantly compressed into a tight, vibrating knot of absolute tension. Katsuki didn't yell. He didn't mock. He just stared, his jaw clenched so tightly a muscle twitched in his cheek, a bead of cold sweat forming at his temple. The silence that fell over Katsuki was far more terrifying to the rest of the class than his shouting. "Ah! It's you!" The tension was broken by Uraraka, who bounded over to Izuku with a bright, radiant smile. "The boy who stopped me from falling. And the one who destroyed that giant robot. I never got to properly thank you." Izuku offered a gentle, polite bow. "It is good to see you are unharmed, Uraraka-san. I am Midoriya Izuku." Ida marched over, his posture stiffly upright. He looked at Izuku with a profound sense of awe mixed with deep respect. "Midoriya! I am Tenya Ida. I must apologize for my behavior at the orientation. You clearly perceived the true nature of the practical exam while I was blinded by the rules. You are truly a superior candidate." "There is no need for apologies, Ida-kun," Izuku said, his voice a calm, resonant frequency that seemed to instantly soothe the nerves of anyone who heard it. "We all perceive the world differently. I am just glad we can learn together." As Izuku walked to his assigned seat, which, to Katsuki's immense, silent horror, was directly behind his, the rest of the class murmured among themselves. "That's the guy?" whispered a boy with spiky red hair, Eijiro Kurishima. "The one who got 170 points? He doesn't look like a powerhouse. He looks like a monk." "I heard he flattened the 0-pointer without even touching it," muttered a boy with electric blonde hair, Denki Kaminari. Izuku ignored the whispers. He sat down, placing his bag by his desk. He looked at the back of Katsuki's head. He could feel the blonde boy's heart hammering against his ribs, a chaotic rhythm of fear and bruised pride. Izuku projected a tiny sliver of his force aura, a gentle wave of calming intent aimed directly at Katsuki. "Peace, Kaken," Izuku thought. Katsuki's shoulders forcibly relaxed, the tension melting out of his muscles against his will. He gritted his teeth, burying his face in his hands, hating the fact that he was so easily influenced by the boy behind him. If you're just here to make friends, you can pack up your things and leave. The voice was gruff, exhausted, and seemed to emanate from the floor. The entire class jumped and looked out into the hallway. Lying on the floor, zipped up in a bright yellow sleeping bag like an oversized, depressed caterpillar, was a man. He had long, unkempt black hair, heavy bags under his bloodshot eyes, and a thick scarf wrapped around his neck. The man unzipped the sleeping bag, stood up, and pulled a juice pouch from his pocket, taking a loud slurp. It took you 8 seconds to quiet down, Shota Aizawa, the pro-hero eraserhead, stated flatly. Time is a limited resource. You kids aren't rational enough. Aizawa stepped up to the podium, his piercing gaze sweeping over the 20 students. He was a man who lived by logic, efficiency, and the cold hard facts of biology. He evaluated his students like tools in a shed, looking for flaws, weaknesses, and potential. His eyes lingered on Izuku Midoriya. Aizawa had read the file. He had watched the footage of the entrance exam a dozen times. He had seen the physics-defying destruction of the zero-pointer. The official registry listed Midoriya's quirk as a mutant strain telekinesis, but Aizawa's instincts told him there was something deeply wrong with that classification. Telekinesis required intense mental strain, a physical toll on the nervous system. The boy in the footage hadn't even blinked. He had obliterated a 20-story machine with the casual ease of a man swatting a fly. Aizawa narrowed his eyes. No teenager should have that much unchecked power. It breeds arrogance. It breeds villains. Today, I'm going to break him down and see what he's really made of. I'm your homeroom teacher, Shota Aizawa, he announced, pulling a dark blue pea uniform from his sleeping bag. Nice to meet you. Now, put these on and head out to the pea grounds. We're doing a quirk apprehension test. The morning sun beat down on the expansive dirt field of the UA training grounds. The 20 students of Class 1A stood in a loose cluster, wearing their blue and white tracksuits. A quirk apprehension test? The class echoed in unison. What about the entrance ceremony? The orientation? Uraraka asked, her brow furrowed in worry. If you're going to become a hero, you don't have time for such leisurely events, Aizawa replied, his back turned to them. UA's selling point is how unrestricted its school traditions are. That's also how the teachers run their classes. Aizawa turned around, holding a digital tracking device and a softball. You kids have been doing these standard fitness tests since junior high. Pitching, long jump, 50-meter dash. But you always did them without quirks. The country still uses averages taken from results devoid of quirks. It's not rational. The Ministry of Education is procrastinating. Aizawa looked at Katsuki. Bakugo, you finished first in the practical exam, if we don't count rescue points. Katsuki flinched slightly at the caveat but stepped forward. What was your best result for the softball throw in junior high? Aizawa asked. 67 meters, Katsuki replied gruffly. Try doing it with your quirk. Aizawa tossed the ball to him. Step into the circle. You can do whatever you want as long as you don't leave the ring. Give it all you've got. Katsuki stretched his arms, a feral grin returning to his face. This was his element. Violence, explosions, raw power. He glanced back at Izuku, his pride demanding a display of dominance. Watch me, Deku. Watch what a real hero's power looks like. Katsuki wound up, his muscles coiling like a spring. As his arm snapped forward, he ignited a massive blast of nitroglycerin sweat from his palm. Die! Katsuki roared. The explosion was deafening. The ball rocketed into the sky, leaving a trail of black smoke in its wake, disappearing into the clouds. The shockwave ruffled the hair of the students watching. Aizawa looked at his digital tracker. It beeped. He turned the screen to the class. 705.2 meters. Know your own maximum first, Aizawa said dryly. That is the most rational way to form the foundation of a hero. 700 meters? That's insane. Kaminari cheered. We can use our quirks as much as we want. This looks like fun. Mina Ishido, a girl with pink skin and horns, exclaimed, bouncing on her heels. Aizawa's expression darkened. The atmosphere instantly plummeted below freezing. Fun, you say? Aizawa's voice was a low, dangerous growl. You have 3 years to become heroes. Are you going to have an attitude like that the whole time? Alright. New rule. Whoever comes in last place in all 8 tests will be judged to have no potential, and will be punished with expulsion. The class erupted in panic. Expulsion? On the first day? Uraraka cried out. That's completely unfair. Natural disasters, massive accidents, and selfish villains, Aizawa countered, his eyes glowing a faint, menacing red beneath his messy hair. Calamities whose time or place cannot be predicted. Japan is covered with unfairness. Heroes are the ones who reverse those situations. If you wanted to go hang out with your friends at McDonald's, too bad. For the next 3 years, UA will do all it can to give you one hardship after another. Go beyond. Plus ultra. Overcome it with all you've got. Izuku stood perfectly still, his face an unreadable mask of serenity. He understood Aizawa's tactic perfectly. It was a logical ruse designed to strip away their complacency and force them to operate at their absolute limit. Fear was a powerful motivator for the unrefined mind, but Izuku did not operate on fear. He operated on balance. I cannot use my full power, Izuku thought, his internal monologue calm and measured. If I apply my maximum telekinetic output, I will shatter the testing equipment, destroy the field, and potentially harm my classmates. I must calculate the exact amount of force necessary to achieve the top percentile without breaking the physical boundaries of reality. Aizawa noticed Izuku's lack of reaction. The boy wasn't sweating. He wasn't trembling. He was just looking at Aizawa with an expression that bordered on polite boredom. We'll see how calm you are when you realize your telekinesis has limits, kid, Aizawa thought, pulling out his clipboard. Test 1, 50-meter dash. The track was a standard dirt lane with a robotic camera set up at the finish line. Runners, on your marks, the robotic voice chimed. Tenya Ida, with his engine Quirk, lined up against a frog-like girl named Tsuyu Azuri. When the gun fired, Ida's calves burst with blue exhaust, propelling him across the finish line in a blistering 3.04 seconds. Well, I'm like a fish in water here, Ida adjusted his glasses proudly. A few heats later, it was Izuku's turn. He stepped up to the starting line. Beside him was Katsuki. Katsuki dropped into a runner's stance, his palms facing backward, tiny sparks already igniting. He was panting slightly, his eyes locked on the finish line. He refused to look at Izuku. Izuku didn't take a stance. He stood completely upright, his hands resting easily at his sides. He closed his eyes. To Izuku, the concept of speed was an illusion. Speed was merely the distance an object traveled over a specific duration of time. But time and space were not rigid constructs. They were threads in the grand tapestry of the Force. Izuku didn't need to push his muscles to their breaking point. He simply needed to pull the finish line toward himself. He channeled a microscopic fraction of the Force into his cells. Force speed. On your marks. Katsuki bared his teeth. Get set. Izuku opened his eyes. They burned with a brilliant, supernatural emerald fire. Bang! Katsuki fired off a massive explosion from his palms, rocketing forward like a human missile. Explosive speed! He roared, shooting across the dirt. He crossed the finish line. The robotic voice announced, 4.13 seconds. Katsuki hit the ground rolling, skidding to a halt. He stood up, a triumphant smirk on his face. He turned back to look at the starting line, ready to gloat at Deku. Are you satisfied with your time, Kaken? Katsuki froze. The voice came from directly behind him. Katsuki whipped around. Izuku was standing 3 feet past the finish line. His breathing was perfectly even. Not a single drop of sweat marred his forehead. There was no dust kicked up behind him. There was no sound of running footsteps. Katsuki's eyes widened in horror. He looked at the starting line, then back at Izuku. It was as if the green-haired boy had simply ceased to exist at point A and instantly reappeared at point B. The robotic timer at the finish line was emitting a glitching, high-pitched whine. The digital display flickered wildly before finally settling on a number. 0.01 seconds. The entire class gasped collectively. 0.01? Kaminari shrieked, grabbing his own hair. That's not running! That's teleportation! He broke the sound barrier. There was no sonic boom. Momo Yayorozu, a highly intelligent girl with a creation quirk, pointed out, her eyes wide with analytical disbelief. To move 50 meters in 1/100th of a second would displace the air so violently it would have blown us all backward. But there was no wind. It defies the laws of thermodynamics. Aizawa stared at his digital tracker. The machine hadn't malfunctioned. The laser sensors had simply barely registered the boy's passage. Aizawa's grip on his clipboard tightened. He didn't use telekinesis to push himself. He altered his own physical momentum to impossible levels. What the hell is going on with his biology? Test 2, grip strength. The students gathered around an electronic grip measuring device. Mizo Shoji, a towering boy with multiple muscular arms, squeezed the device. 540 kilograms. Wow! 540 kilos. Are you a gorilla? An octopus? Mina cheered. Aizawa handed a fresh device to Izuku. Izuku held the small metal and plastic machine in his right hand. He looked at it. He knew that the human body could only exert so much pressure before the bones in the hand shattered under their own force. But Izuku wasn't going to use his muscles. He wrapped his fingers around the handle. He tapped into the force, letting the cosmic energy flow down his arm, bypassing his muscle fibers and directly manipulating the atomic structure of the space between his hand and the machine. Aizawa watched him like a hawk. This is it, the underground hero thought. If he tries to use that invisible telekinesis to crush it, I'll erase it. I need to see what his base physical limits are without his quirk. I need to show him he's still human. As Izuku began to apply the invisible pressure, Aizawa acted. His capture weapon flared to life, floating around his neck like a nest of angry snakes. His long black hair defied gravity, standing straight up. His eyes snapped wide open, glowing a fierce, menacing red. Erasure. Aizawa focused his quirk entirely on Izuku. Erasure worked by temporarily shutting down the quirk factor within a person's DNA, severing the biological connection between the user and their superhuman ability. It was absolute. It had never failed him in his entire career. Aizawa felt the familiar click in his mind that indicated his quirk had latched onto a target. Izuku squeezed the machine. Aizawa expected the boy's grip to falter. He expected the digital counter to read a normal, human 30 or 40 kilograms. Instead, Aizawa watched in sheer, unadulterated horror as the metal handles of the device began to groan. Then they shrieked. Izuku's face remained utterly impassive. He didn't strain. He didn't grit his teeth. He merely tightened his grip. Under the crushing pressure of the force, the titanium springs of the machine didn't just break, they atomized. The plastic casing shattered into dust. The digital screen exploded into a shower of sparks. In less than 3 seconds, the incredibly durable piece of testing equipment was reduced to a handful of fine, glittering metallic powder that slipped through Izuku's fingers and blew away in the breeze. Izuku opened his hand, dusting off his palm. He looked at the pile of dust on the ground. I apologize, Aizawa-sensei, Izuku said politely. I miscalculated the structural integrity of the machine. I cannot provide an accurate numerical score. Aizawa was frozen. His hair was still standing on end. His eyes were still glowing red, burning from the strain of keeping them open. He was actively, desperately using erasure on the boy, but nothing had happened. Aizawa let his quirk drop. His hair fell back to his shoulders. He rubbed his dry, aching eyes, his mind reeling. My quirk didn't work. That's impossible. I felt it connect. But, it was like trying to put out a forest fire with a single drop of water. No, worse. It was like trying to erase the concept of gravity. Aizawa walked over to Izuku. The rest of the class fell silent, sensing the intense confrontation. Midoriya, Aizawa said, his voice stripped of its usual lazy drawl, replaced by a razor-sharp edge. What just happened? I squeezed the machine, sir, Izuku replied simply. Don't play games with me. Aizawa stepped closer, looming over the boy. I used my quirk on you. I erased your quirk factor. You should not have been able to use your telekinesis. The class gasped. They knew Eraserhead. They knew what he could do. If he erased Midoriya's quirk, How did the boy just turn solid metal into dust? Izuku looked up at Aizawa. There was no defiance in his eyes. There was only a deep, ancient sorrow, the kind of sorrow a teacher feels when explaining a difficult truth to a child. You did use your quirk, sir. I felt it, Izuku said, his voice dropping to a low murmur meant only for Aizawa. It felt like a very cold shadow brushing against my skin. Then why didn't it work? Aizawa demanded. Because my power is not biological, Aizawa-sensei, Izuku explained patiently. Erasure targets the genetic mutations in human DNA. But I do not have a quirk factor. I am genetically identical to a quirkless human. Aizawa's pupils shrank. That's a lie. You manipulated matter. That requires a biological catalyst. It does not, Izuku countered softly. My power is the energy that exists between all living things. It binds the galaxy together. It flows through the earth beneath our feet, the air we breathe, and the stars in the sky. It is omnipresent. You cannot erase it, sir, because it does not come from me. I am merely a conduit. You cannot close a door that has no hinges. Aizawa stared into Izuku's emerald eyes. The underground hero was a man of science. A man of logic. What the boy was saying sounded like mystical, religious nonsense, and yet, Aizawa's instincts, honed by years of near-death experiences in the dark alleys of Japan's underworld, screamed at him. The boy wasn't lying. Aizawa remembered the absolute lack of biological feedback when he used his quirk. When he looked at a normal student, he could see their quirk factor in his mind's eye. But when he looked at Izuku Midoriya while using erasure, he hadn't seen a quirk factor. He had seen an abyss of blinding, infinite light. Aizawa took a step back. The hair on the back of his neck prickled. For the first time in his adult life, the pro-hero eraser had felt completely, utterly powerless. He was looking at a demigod wearing a high school uniform. Aizawa swallowed hard, forcing his face back into a mask of bored indifference. He couldn't let the other students see him shaken. Fine, Aizawa grunted, writing unmeasurable on his clipboard. Next test. The test continued, and Izuku's performance systematically broke the spirit of every other student in the class, not through malice, but through sheer, unfathomable superiority. In the standing long jump, Izuku didn't jump. He simply stepped off the ground and floated lazily across the sandbox, landing softly on the other side. In the repeated side steps, Izuku used force speed again, moving so fast that he created a dozen perfectly solid afterimages, making it look as though there were 12 Midoriyas vibrating in place. Finally, it was time for the final test. The softball throw. Achiko Uraraka stepped into the ring. She tapped the ball with all 5 of her fingertips, activating her zero gravity, and tossed it gently into the air. The ball floated upward, higher and higher, until it was a speck in the sky, and then vanished. Aizawa held up the tracker. The screen displayed the infinity symbol, infinity. Infinity? The class screamed. That's amazing! Izuku stepped up to the ring next. He held the standard regulation softball in his hand. He looked at the infinity symbol still lingering in his mind. He knew Uraraka's score was technically a manipulation of mass, allowing the ball to drift endlessly through the vacuum of space once it left the atmosphere. Izuku wanted to see if he could match the mathematical concept of infinity through sheer kinetic output. He didn't wind up like Katsuki. He didn't activate a glowing quirk like Uraraka. Izuku tossed the ball lightly into the air, about a foot above his head. What is he doing? Kirishima whispered. Is he giving up? As the ball reached the apex of its tiny arc, Izuku raised 2 fingers. He didn't strike the ball physically. He unleashed a localized, pinpointed thrust of the force directly into the center of the ball's mass, commanding space to violently reject the object. Boom! The sound was apocalyptic. A massive ring of white vapor materialized instantly around the ball, a visible sonic boom that shattered the air. The concussive shockwave hit the class like a physical wall. Several students, including Mineta and Kaminari, were literally blown off their feet, tumbling backward into the dirt. Aizawa had to cross his arms and dig his boots into the ground just to stay upright, his scarf whipping wildly in the artificial hurricane. The ball didn't fly. It teleported. It left a blinding trail of superheated plasma in its wake, tearing through the atmosphere at a velocity that defied comprehension. It pierced the cloud layer instantly, leaving a perfectly circular hole in the sky. Izuku lowered his fingers. The hurricane winds died down instantly. Aizawa looked down at his digital tracker. The machine was completely blank. It hadn't recorded a distance. Sensei? Izuku asked politely. Did it register? Aizawa tapped the screen. It flickered to life. A single, blinking error message appeared on the display. Signal lost. Elevation: 400,000 meters. The ball had breached the exosphere. Izuku Midoriya had casually thrown a piece of sporting equipment into lower Earth orbit. Aizawa turned the screen around so the class could see. The silence that followed was heavier than a black hole. Katsuki Bakugo stood frozen, his eyes wide and vacant. His mind completely broke attempting to process the sheer scale of the power gap. A 700-meter throw was the peak of human capability, but Deku had just put a ball into space without even winding up his arm. The inferiority complex that Katsuki had nurtured for 10 years didn't just sting, it utterly consumed him. He's a monster, Minato whimpered from the dirt, trembling. No, Todoroki, the boy with the half-fire, half-ice quirk, murmured quietly from the back of the group. His mismatched eyes were locked onto Izuku. He's not a monster. He has perfect control. He didn't even displace the ground he was standing on. Todoroki was right. Despite launching an object at orbital velocity, Izuku's sneakers hadn't even kicked up a puff of dust inside the white chalk circle. The kinetic energy had been perfectly, flawlessly contained to the ball itself. Aizawa pocketed his tracker. He looked at Izuku. The boy was looking back at him, offering a small, apologetic smile. I wanted to break him down, Aizawa thought, a profound sense of exhaustion washing over him. I wanted to show him that his quirk couldn't solve everything. But I can't break something that has no limits. I can't teach a god how to walk. Alright, we're done here, Aizawa said, his voice flat. I'll project your total scores on the hologram. The person with the lowest score, well, whatever. The hologram flared to life. 1. Midoriya Izuku. 2. Yaoyoro Momo. 3. Todoroki Shoto. 4. Bakugo Katsuki. 20. Minato Minoru. Minato fell to his knees, openly weeping. No! Expelled on the first day. I'll never get to touch a hero's. By the way, I was lying about the expulsion, Aizawa said, flashing a terrifying, feral grin. It was a rational deception to draw out the upper limits of your quirks. The class, except for Momo, Todoroki, and Izuku, shrieked in outrage. A deception? Ida yelled, clutching his chest. Such manipulation from a teacher. Of course it was a lie, Momo sighed, shaking her head. If you thought about it logically, it was obvious. Izuku walked back toward the group. As he passed Katsuki, the blonde boy suddenly lunged forward, his hands crackling with tiny explosions. It was a desperate, mindless reaction driven entirely by broken pride. Deku! Tell me what you did! Katsuki roared, tears of sheer frustration prickling his eyes. What the hell is your power? Tell me! Before Katsuki could take a second step, he stopped. He didn't hit an invisible wall. He simply found himself unable to move forward. His feet were rooted to the ground. His arms hung limp at his sides. Izuku hadn't turned around. He hadn't raised a hand. He was simply looking over his shoulder, his emerald eyes boring into Katsuki's soul. I told you a long time ago, Kaken, Izuku said, his voice ringing with that same, terrifyingly calm resonance. I am just trying to be a hero. My power is my own burden to bear. Focus on your own path. Izuku blinked, and the invisible hold was released. Katsuki stumbled forward, catching himself before he hit the dirt. He didn't yell again. He just stared at the ground, his whole body shaking. Aizawa watched the exchange from a distance. He noted how Izuku handled Bakugo. There was no malice. There was no ego. Midoriya didn't revel in his power. He seemed almost weary of it. He restrained Bakugo with the absolute minimum amount of force required to stop a conflict. Maybe, Aizawa thought, turning to walk back to the school building, maybe humanity got lucky. If a kid with that much power had been born with a twisted heart, the world would have ended today, but he has the temperament of a saint. Aizawa pulled a juice pouch from his pocket. Still, God or not, he's in my class. And I'm going to make sure he knows how to save people, not just obliterate physics. The Quirk apprehension test was over. The hierarchy of Class 1A had been established. There were the students, with their varied and impressive quirks, striving to become pro-heroes. And then there was Izuku Midoriya, existing in a realm entirely his own, holding the weight of the universe in the palm of his hand, waiting for a challenge that could truly test him.